When I speak of the empath, I do not speak of a modern label or a fashionable identity. I speak of a recognizable psychological type, ancient as the fires of the first tribe, a particular arrangement of soul and nervous system in which the boundaries of the person are porous, and the signals of the world enter as though there were no skin. Such a one feels before she thinks, absorbs before she evaluates, senses the unsaid before she can name it. She is born with a certain inward hearing, a sensitivity to tremors in the human field, and because of this, she is often called compassionate, gifted, good, even holy. Yet the psyche is never so simple, for what appears as virtue on the surface may hide an unconscious bargain below. And the warning I offer you tonight is not a moral warning, as though you were doing something wrong. It is a warning about the subtle traps of the unconscious, the way the soul can betray itself while believing it is being loving. Compassion is a sacred word, and yet it is also a dangerous one. Many people imagine compassion as a straight line from the heart to the other. You feel their pain, you help them, you forgive them, you carry them. But the psyche is not linear. It moves in circles, spirals, and symbolic reversals. The empath often believes she is giving love, but she is sometimes giving away herself, and she cannot see it because the act is bathed in light. It looks noble, it sounds spiritual, it even feels like her identity. But beneath it, if we follow the thread into the deeper chambers, we may find a pattern of self-erasure, a quiet abandonment of the self in favor of an archetype that has possessed her. The empath becomes the healer, the redeemer, the good one, the one who understands, the one who never harms, the one who never leaves. And when such an archetype takes the throne, it speaks in the language of compassion while demanding sacrifice. Always sacrifice until the person no longer knows where her soul ends and her duty begins. To betray oneself is not always to do something dramatic. It may occur in the most gentle moments. It may occur through a smile, through listening longer than your body can bear, through forgiving while your heart is still bleeding, through explaining yourself again while your spirit is already tired, through staying when a deeper voice has already said, "Go." Self-betrayal wears soft clothing. It does not often shout. It whispers. It says, "Bekennt." It says, "Don't make a scene." It says, "Understand them." It says, "They had a hard childhood." It says, "They didn't mean it." It says, "You are stronger." It says, "Your compassion is your purpose." And each time you obey that whisper against your own inner truth, a small fracture occurs in the relationship between ego and self. At first, it is hardly noticeable, but the psyche remembers, the body remembers, the dream remembers, and in time, the empath, who believes she is saving others, begins to feel strangely depleted, foggy, resentful, hollow. She cannot explain it, because she has done everything right. Yet, the inner world does not care for appearances. It cares for truth. You must understand what compassion becomes when it is ruled by fear. Fear is the great distorter of love. Compassion born from strength is clean. It does not beg. It does not cling. It does not disappear. It is clear like mountain water, But compassion born from fear becomes a strategy. It becomes a method to control chaos, to prevent abandonment, to avoid conflict, to maintain the image of goodness, to keep the world predictable. In this form, compassion is no longer a gift, it is a defense. And the empath, because she has always been sensitive, may confuse this defense with the essence of her soul. She may say, "This is who I am." But I tell you, what you call who I am is often what you had to become to survive. Let us descend into the origins, because the unconscious does not invent patterns without a reason. When I listen to the stories of such people, I often hear a similar early atmosphere. There was love, yes, perhaps even much love. But love was not safe. Love was not simple. Love required attunement. Love required reading the room. Love required pleasing. The child learned that her own feelings caused trouble, that her needs were too much, that her anger was dangerous, that her sadness made others withdraw. The child then developed a remarkable talent. She learned to become the emotional caretaker before she became herself. She sensed the moods, anticipated the storms, softened the father, soothed the mother, became small, became good, became necessary. And necessity is a powerful trap. If the child becomes necessary for peace, then love becomes conditional upon self-betrayal. She must betray her spontaneous truth to preserve connection. She must betray her instincts to keep the attachment. This is not a conscious decision, it is an archetypal adaptation, a survival intelligence. Yet what saved her then becomes her prison later. She grows into an adult who gives compassion as though it were oxygen, who overextends without noticing, who forgives too quickly, who finds herself repeatedly drawn toward wounded, chaotic, narcissistic, or starving souls, not because she enjoys suffering, but because her unconscious recognizes the pattern. If I care enough, I will be safe. If I love enough, I will not be left. Here, compassion has been contaminated by the orphan wound. The inner child still believes that love must be earned through service, and because this belief is painful, it hides behind a sacred mask. The empath may even become proud of her compassion, not as arrogance, but as identity. She will say, "I'm the one who understands. I'm the one who sees good in people. I'm the one who doesn't judge. And I do not mock this. I respect the beauty of such a heart. Yet I must name the shadow that often accompanies it. She may also be the one who cannot say no, the one who fears her own boundaries, the one who feels guilt when she protects herself, the one who equates self-respect with selfishness, the one who confuses endurance with love, and in this confusion the self is slowly abandoned. There is a mythic image I want you to hold. Imagine a woman in a temple carrying a lamp. She walks through the corridors of the human heart, illuminating dark corners for others. Everywhere she goes, people lift their faces toward her light. They call her a blessing, yet she never turns the lamp toward herself. Her own inner chambers remain unvisited. Her own wounds remain unlit. She becomes a priestess of other people's healing, while her own soul remains in exile. This is the empath possessed by the healer archetype without the counterbalance of individuation. And the danger is that the lamp begins to burn her hands. What was a gift becomes a burden. What was compassion becomes martyrdom. What was sensitivity becomes hypervigilance. And then something dark creeps in. Resentment, not the dramatic resentment that explodes, but the quiet resentment that poisons. The empath smiles, but her body tightens. She helps, but she feels used. She forgives, but she feels unseen. She cannot admit this resentment because it violates her self-image. So she pushes it down, and it becomes shadow. No, the shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of you you have not allowed to belong. And for the empath, what is most often exiled into shadow is not cruelty but power, not hatred but self-assertion, not selfishness but legitimate self-interest. She has made goodness her identity, and so everything that threatens goodness is split off. Anger becomes forbidden, refusal becomes forbidden, detachment becomes forbidden. She mistakes these forces as moral failure, but the psyche is not interested in your moral costume. It is interested in wholeness, and wholeness demands that you reclaim what you have exiled. Until then, compassion will remain incomplete, and incomplete compassion becomes self-betrayal. Consider this. The empath may be compassionate not only to others, but also to the abuser within them. By abuser, I mean that inner voice that says, endure, tolerate, be understanding, don't leave. The outer world may contain a narcissistic figure, but the inner world contains a similar pattern, an inner tyrant that demands you be endlessly patient. Many empaths are being controlled twice, once by the other person, and once by their own compassion. This is why they feel trapped even when the door is open. They could walk away, but guilt chains them. They could set a boundary, but fear of being bad silences them. They have become loyal to an archetype rather than loyal to the self. When such a person comes into analysis, dreams speak before the tongue does. Dreams are the great corrective. They are the psyche's rebellion against the one-sided conscious attitude. An empath who overgives may dream of being robbed, tyranned, chased, devoured, or living in a house with no doors. She may dream of animals, wolves at the edge of the village, snakes in the bed, a raven perched on her shoulder, a lion locked in a cage. These are not random. The wolf is instinct, demanding respect. The snake is transformation, asking her to shed a skin. The raven is the messenger of the underworld, carrying truth she avoids. The lion is her sovereignty, her power, her rightful authority, locked away because she fears it will hurt someone. In another dream, she may find herself in a vast ocean, trying to hold water in her hands, and the more she tries to save it, the more it slips away. This is the image of futile compassion, of trying to rescue what cannot be rescued, of confusing love with control. You must see clearly that compassion is not the same as responsibility. The empath often confuses the two. She feels another suffering and believes it is her duty to fix it. But that is not compassion, that is inflation. It is the ego unconsciously claiming godlike power. If I love enough, I can change them. If I explain enough, they will understand. If I stay enough, they will become safe. This is not humility. This is a secret form of pride disguised as virtue, and the unconscious will punish inflation. It will bring exhaustion, depression, anxiety, or illness, not as revenge but as correction, as though the body is saying, "You are not meant to be the savior." This brings us to a painful and essential truth. Sometimes your compassion is the very thing that prevents another person from facing themselves. The empath may continually soften consequences, absorb cruelty, excuse betrayal, or carry the emotional weight that belongs to the other. In doing so, she keeps them infantile. She becomes the mother to an adult. She becomes the conscience for someone who refuses conscience. She becomes the mirror for someone who refuses self-reflection. And in that arrangement, compassion becomes collusion. It becomes an unconscious agreement. I will keep loving you so I don't have to face my fear of being alone. And you will keep taking so you don't have to face your emptiness. This is not love, it is a pact between wounds. Now I know the protest that rises in the empath's heart. She will say, "But I don't want to be cold. I don't want to be cruel. I don't want to become like them." This fear is common, and it reveals the empath's deepest wound. She associates boundaries with betrayal. Perhaps as a child she witnessed abandonment, coldness, emotional withdrawal. Perhaps she equated distance with punishment, and so she believes that if she steps back, she will become heartless. But I tell you, detachment is not heartlessness. Detachment, when it is mature, is love without self-destruction. It is the soul's ability to remain present without being consumed. It is compassion that does not require self-erasure. We must speak of the self, that central organizing principle of the psyche, the deeper totality beyond ego. The self does not ask you to be endlessly nice. It asks you to become whole, and wholeness includes limits. The psyche has borders for a reason. A cell without a membrane is not spiritual, it is dead. Likewise, a person without boundaries is not holy, she is invaded. Compassion without boundaries is not love, it is self-abandonment. And the self will eventually force a boundary, often through symptoms, through breakdown, through the sudden collapse of strength. Many empaths think they are strong because they endure, but endurance is not always strength. Sometimes endurance is fear in armor. If you want to understand the turning point, imagine standing at a threshold in a dream. Behind you is a familiar house, full of memories, in roles, obligations. Ahead of you is a forest, dark, unknown, wild. The empath often stays in the house because it feels safe to be needed. In the house she has identity, the helper, the one who understands, but the forest calls her toward herself. The forest is the shadow territory, where she must meet her anger, her grief, her refusal, her power, her loneliness, her hunger, her sacred selfishness. And this is frightening, because to enter the forest is to disappoint someone. It is to stop performing. It is to be misunderstood. Yet individuation is precisely this, the courage to become what you are, even when the tribe does not applaud. In this sense, the empath's compassion can indeed become a hidden form of self-betrayal when it is used to avoid her own individuation. She may give compassion to avoid conflict, to avoid guilt, to avoid the pain of separating from old archetypes. But the psyche cannot be fooled forever. What is avoided returns, and it returns with force. The more the empath suppresses her truth, the more it appears in dreams, in sudden rage, in dissociation, in numbness, in illnesses that have no clear medical cause, in a nervous system that finally screams, "Stop, you are not here to be consumed." Let us speak of the nervous system because it is not separate from the psyche. The empath often lives in a state of chronic alertness. She reads micro-expressions, listens for shifts in tone, scans for danger. She calls it intuition. But sometimes it is trauma. Intuition is quiet, clear, is centered. Trauma is loud, urgent, panicked. The empath may confuse the two because she has lived so long with hypervigilance that it feels like spiritual sensitivity. She may say, "I can feel everything." And yes, she can, but this capacity, when driven by fear, becomes a trap. It compels her toward endless compassion because she cannot tolerate the tension of someone being upset with her. So she soothes, she over-explains, she apologizes for existing, she gives more, not because she chooses love, but because her body cannot tolerate disapproval. This is compassion turned into self-regulation. She uses helping others to calm her own anxiety. If everyone is okay, I am okay. If they forgive me, I can breathe. If they smile, I am safe. And so she becomes an emotional servant to other people's moods. This is the deepest self-betrayal, to make your safety dependent on controlling the emotional climate of others. It is exhausting because it is impossible. No human can regulate the world for long, but the empath keeps trying because her inner child believes that if she fails, love will disappear. I want you to sense the tragedy here. A soul meant to love becomes imprisoned by love. A heart meant to flow becomes chained to duty. A gift meant to illuminate becomes a torch that burns its bearer. And the world applauds because the empath makes life easier for others. She absorbs what others will not face. She carries what others refuse. She offers tenderness into places that are harsh. Society rewards this. Families reward this. Narcissistic personalities reward this. But the self does not reward it, because the self is not interested in your usefulness. It is interested in your truth. There is a moment in every individuation journey when compassion must be purified, not discarded. Purified, the empath must learn to ask a dangerous question. Is this compassion, or is this self-betrayal? Is this love, or is this fear? Is this forgiveness, or is this avoidance? Is this understanding, or is this denial of my own wound? The psyche will not tolerate lies, even beautiful ones, and the empath must finally recognize that her compassion has a shadow. It can become a form of control. It can become a form of superiority. It can become a form of self-hatred, for if you continually give away your needs, you are also implying that your needs do not matter. And to treat your own needs as irrelevant is a subtle form of self-contempt. No matter how saintly it looks, perhaps the most painful insight is this: the empath often offers compassion to those who do not offer it back because she is trying to heal an earlier wound. She is replaying the past, hoping for a different ending. She thinks, if I love this person enough, they will finally see me. They will finally value me. They will finally choose me. But this is not the present. It is the child's hope wearing adult clothing. It is the inner orphan trying to secure what was missing. And this is why empaths are often magnetized toward emotionally unavailable partners, narcissistic figures, or wounded souls. The unconscious is not seeking happiness, it is seeking completion. It wants the story to resolve. Yet the resolution does not come from changing the other. It comes from refusing the old contract. It comes from turning compassion inward toward the part of you that has been abandoned for years. And when you turn compassion inward, something shocking occurs. You begin to feel anger, not because you have become bitter, but because the soul has been ignored. Anger is the guardian of boundaries. It is sacred. It is the fire that says, enough. Many empaths fear anger because they associate it with violence. Yet anger, when conscious, is clarity. It is the psyche's immune system. Without it, you are spiritually defenseless. So the empath must reclaim anger, not to attack others, but to defend the self. She must learn the alchemy, anger transformed into boundary, boundary transformed into self-respect, self-respect transformed into love that is clean. In dreams, this often appears as a woman finally closing a door, or walking away from a crowd, or saying no and feeling the ground beneath her feet, or meeting a fierce animal that once terrified her, only to discover it is her protector. The psyche begins to return power to her. Her nervous system begins to calm, not because life is perfect, but because she is no longer at war with her own instincts. She begins to experience a new kind of compassion, one that does not require her to disappear. And here we touch the mystical dimension. True compassion is not personal. It is archetypal. It is an energy that flows through you, not a resource you own. When you confuse compassion with your personal identity, you become inflated and depleted. But when compassion becomes an expression of the self, it has wisdom. It knows when to give and when to withdraw. It knows when to speak and when to remain silent. It knows that sometimes the most compassionate act is distance, because distance forces the other to meet themselves. Sometimes compassion is a boundary. Sometimes compassion is letting them feel the consequences. Sometimes compassion is leaving. This is the paradox that frightens the empath. Leaving can be love. Saying no can be love. Detachment can be love. Silence can be love. Because love is not the same as merging. Love is not the same as rescue. Love is not the same as self-abandonment. Love is the honoring of the soul's truth, and your soul cannot be honored while you keep sacrificing it on the altar of someone else's needs. So I ask you to reflect inwardly, not with judgment, but with courage. Where has your compassion become a mask? Where has your understanding become self-denial? Where have you forgiven too quickly because you feared conflict? Where have you stayed because you feared loneliness? Where have you called your endurance strength when it was actually fear? The answers may not come as thoughts. They may come as feelings, as heaviness in the chest, as a tightening in the throat, as a memory of the moment you wanted to say no but smiled instead. The psyche speaks through the body. If you learn to listen, it will guide you out of the old temple and into the forest of your true life. And do not imagine that this journey will make you cold. It will make you more alive. It will return you to your own center. The empath who stops betraying herself does not lose compassion. She gains sovereignty. She becomes capable of true compassion because she is no longer offering love as a plea for safety. She offers it from fullness, not from hunger. She becomes a vessel, not a martyr. She becomes a woman whose kindness has teeth not to bite, but to protect. And when she speaks, her words carry the weight of someone who has finally stopped abandoning herself in the name of being good. For it is precisely here that the empath begins to tremble, not before the cruelty of others, but before the dawning realization that her compassion has been entangled with her fear. And when this recognition arrives, it does not arrive politely. It arrives as a crack in the old personality, as though the mask that has protected her for years has begun to split. At first, she tries to repair it because the mask has been called goodness, spirituality, devotion, loyalty. She has been praised for it. She has been needed for it. She has been loved if it was love for it. And so when the psyche begins to whisper that this very compassion has been a hidden betrayal of the self, she feels as though she is committing a crime against her own identity. This is why the empath often resists individuation, not because she is weak, but because she has confused her adaptation with her essence. To let go of her old form of compassion feels like letting go of her moral worth. She may say, if I stop giving, who am I? If I stop understanding, am I still good? If I stop forgiving, have I become bitter? If I stop rescuing, have I become selfish? But this is the language of a frightened ego, still chained to a childhood equation. I am lovable only when I am useful. The self does not speak in this fearful arithmetic. The self speaks with symbols, with dreams, with the deep certainty that what is true may also be painful, and what is painful may also be liberation. Let us speak more concretely now of the moment compassion becomes self-betrayal. It happens at a threshold, like the edge of a lake where the water is beautiful but cold. There is always an inner sensation, subtle at first, which says, this is too much. You are tired. You do not want to do this again. You feel invaded. You feel dishonored. You feel that you are losing something precious. Yet the empath overrides this sensation with a higher narrative. She says, but they need me. She says, but if I don't, no one will. She says, but I must be the bigger person. She says, but I promised. She says, but I understand their trauma. She says, but if I set a boundary, they will collapse. And so she goes back into the pattern, while something inside grows quieter and colder, as though a part of her soul is slowly withdrawing from the body. This withdrawal is not simply fatigue, it is the spirit's protest, for the psyche cannot endure endless betrayal without consequence. When you betray yourself repeatedly, you begin to live in a mild dissociation. You become less present. You may still function, still smile, still perform compassion, but your eyes lose a certain light. You begin to feel unreal, as though you are watching your life from behind glass. And then, often, you develop symptoms: anxiety with no obvious cause, insomnia, sudden heart palpitations, a sense of dread, digestive troubles, a nervous system that stays on alert even in peace. These are not random disorders. They are messages. The unconscious has many languages, but the most reliable is the body. The empath often becomes frightened by these symptoms, and so she doubles her efforts. She meditates more, prays more, helps more, gives more, because helping others is the only way she knows to regulate her inner chaos. Yet this is the tragedy. The very mechanism she uses to calm herself is the mechanism that is draining her. It is like trying to quench thirst with salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become, and then, one day, something happens that feels almost mystical. The empath suddenly cannot do it anymore. She reaches a limit. She wakes up, and the old compassion no longer feels holy. It feels like a lie. She may feel guilt, and still she cannot. She may feel fear, and still she cannot. This is not laziness. This is not cruelty. This is the self rising. You see, the self is not sentimental. It is compassionate, but not sentimental. It does not ask you to destroy yourself to keep others comfortable. It does not ask you to remain in a situation that is poisoning your soul. It does not ask you to keep giving to those who treat your generosity as an entitlement. This is why I say compassion must be purified. The empath must undergo an inner alchemy, and every alchemy begins with the recognition that the old substance is impure. In the language of ancient symbolism, the empath begins in a state like the albedo, the whiteness, the obsession with purity, goodness, light, being the moral one, but beneath this whiteness is a repressed nigredo, the blackness, rage, grief, hunger, envy, perhaps, desire for freedom, desire to be selfish in the sacred sense, the desire to exist without being responsible for everyone else. The empath fears this darkness because she believes it will make her like the very people who hurt her. But the darkness is not the narcissist. The darkness is her own unlived life. The shadow is not evil. The shadow is the part of her that has been denied, and denied life becomes poisonous. So the psyche, in its wisdom, begins to force her to meet it, and it does so through external events as well. Often the empath attracts figures who embody her denied qualities. If she has denied selfishness, she may attract someone selfish. If she has denied power, she may attract someone power-hungry. If she has denied rage, she may attract someone aggressive. This is projection in its most brutal form. The unconscious arranges the stage so that you must finally see what you have disowned. You hate the narcissist, yet he shows you your own disowned sovereignty. You despise his entitlement, yet he exposes how you have treated your own needs as unworthy. You fear his coldness, yet he reveals how you have never allowed yourself to say no. This is why the empath's fascination with the narcissistic type is not merely a moral conflict, it is an archetypal drama. The narcissist often appears as a shadow figure, not because he is simply your shadow, but because he forces the encounter with shadow. He becomes the mirror in which you see what you have sacrificed. He becomes the initiator who, without knowing it, pushes you toward individuation by exhausting your old patterns. The empath thinks she is trapped by him, yet the deeper reality is this. She is being initiated by the psychic necessity of her own evolution. She is being forced to choose herself, and this is why the relationship feels both like a curse and like fate. But let us not romanticize suffering. The psyche does not require you to be destroyed to awaken. Yet many empaths unconsciously believe suffering is proof of love. They carry a secret theology: if it hurts, it must be real. If I endure, it means I'm loyal. If I sacrifice, it means I'm good. This is the martyr archetype, often inherited from family systems, religion, and cultural conditioning. Many women in particular have been taught that their worth is measured by their capacity to endure. And so the empath becomes a temple built on endurance. She suffers and calls it love. She bleeds and calls it devotion. She disappears and calls it compassion. Yet the self whispers another truth: love does not ask you to vanish. Love asks you to appear. You must understand this with great seriousness. The greatest betrayal is not when another person uses you. The greatest betrayal is when you participate in your own erasure. The empath often participates because she fears the consequences of presence. Presence creates ripples. Presence creates boundaries. Presence creates disappointment in those who benefited from your absence. When you begin to be present, many people will accuse you of changing. They will say, "You're cold now, you're selfish now, you're not the same." But what they truly mean is, you are no longer convenient, you are no longer compliant, you are no longer disappearing to make me feel powerful. And here the empath meets a terrifying archetypal gatekeeper: guilt. Guilt is the great guardian of old roles. It is not always moral guilt. Often it is relational guilt, attachment guilt, the guilt of separating from family systems, the guilt of no longer being the emotional caretaker. The empath feels guilt not because she has done wrong, but because she has broken the unconscious contract. She has stopped paying the price that used to secure her belonging. In analysis, we often see this guilt appear in dreams. The empath may dream she is abandoning a child, leaving a crying animal, or walking away from an injured person. She wakes in panic, believing the dream is proof she is cruel. But the dream is not accusing her. It is showing her the fear. The old pattern equated self-care with abandonment. The psyche is presenting this fear so it can be integrated. For the empath must learn to tolerate the sensation of someone else's discomfort without rushing to fix it. She must learn a new language of love, the love that does not rescue, the love that respects autonomy, the love that allows another person to feel their own consequences. This is the love of adults, and many empaths, though biologically adult, have been trapped in a childish definition of love. Love means never letting anyone suffer, especially not because of me. But this is impossible. To live is to cause pain. Even honesty causes pain. Even boundaries cause pain. Even leaving causes pain. The empath must accept the tragic truth: you cannot be fully alive and fully harmless. Wholeness is not harmlessness. Wholeness is truth. And truth often wounds illusions. Now let us approach the mystical center of this warning. There is a hidden seduction in compassion. Compassion can become a form of spiritual inflation. The empath may unconsciously believe she is chosen to heal others, that her purpose is to carry pain, that she has a special destiny as a redeemer, and perhaps she does have a gift. Yet every gift has a temptation, the temptation to become the gift rather than the person. When you become the gift, you become an instrument without sovereignty. You become a candle that burns for others until nothing remains. and the world calls you holy, but inside you feel empty. The true mystical path is not self-sacrifice without consciousness. The true mystical path is union with the self, and union with the self requires a radical honesty. It requires that you see where your compassion is not love but fear. It requires that you see where your healing is not healing but control. It requires that you see where your forgiveness is not forgiveness but the avoidance of anger. It requires that you see where your loyalty is not loyalty but trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is not merely emotional addiction. It is an archetypal attachment to suffering. The empath becomes attached to the familiar pain because it feels like home. She may have grown up in an atmosphere where love and pain were intertwined, and so she cannot recognize love without pain. When she meets a stable, healthy relationship, she feels bored, restless, suspicious. Her nervous system misses the chaos. She calls chaos passion. She calls intensity connection. She calls anxiety intuition, and so she returns to those who harm her, because harm feels like the old temple. This is the deepest betrayal, to mistake pain for destiny. And yet, I tell you, the psyche is merciful. It does not abandon you because you have betrayed yourself. It simply continues to call you home. It sends signals. It sends dreams. It sends exhaustion. It sends breakdowns. It sends encounters with shadow figures. It sends sudden awakenings. It sends an internal voice that becomes impossible to silence. And this voice says, quietly at first, what about you? What about your life? What about your desire? What about your body? What about your time? What about your peace? The empath often has never asked these questions without guilt. She may even feel shame for having desires. She may feel shame for wanting ease. She may feel shame for wanting to be cared for. And so her compassion becomes a way to avoid shame. If I give, I am worthy. If I need, I am weak. This is the wounded feminine archetype, the good daughter archetype. The dutiful one. She has become devoted to a myth that a good woman is a giving woman. But this myth, when unconscious, becomes a coffin. You must allow a new archetype to rise, the sovereign. The sovereign is not selfish in the childish sense. The sovereign is the part of the psyche that knows its own value without needing validation. It is the inner authority that says, my life belongs to me. My energy is sacred. My boundaries are holy. My compassion is not available to be exploited. The sovereign is the adult self emerging from the ruins of the caretaker persona. And when the sovereign rises, many relationships will change. Some will end. Some will deepen. Some will collapse. This is not punishment. This is reality correcting itself. For relationships built on self-betrayal cannot survive self-respect. Often empaths fear that if they stop giving, they will become alone. This fear is not irrational. Many people indeed leave when you stop feeding them. But here is the mystery. The loneliness that comes from being used is far more devastating than the loneliness that comes from being free. One loneliness is abandonment by others. The other loneliness is reunion with the self. And though reunion may feel empty at first, it becomes fertile. It becomes the soil from which a new life grows. In dreams, this transformation often appears as leaving a crowded house and walking into open land, or shedding old clothes, or cutting hair, or breaking a thin veil, or closing a door with calm certainty. or meeting an older woman, a wise figure, who places a crown on the dreamer's head. These are images of individuation. The psyche is moving from the child who pleases to the adult who chooses. And now, let us speak of the critical distinction: compassion versus self-abandonment. Compassion is an inner attitude of openness. It does not require action. It does not always require rescue. It can be silent. It can be distant. It can simply be understanding without participation. Self-abandonment, on the other hand, is action that violates inner truth. It is the yes said when the soul says no. It is staying when the body says leave. It is forgiving when the wound is still open. It is explaining when you are not being heard. It is giving when you are being drained. The empath must learn to differentiate these. Not intellectually, but somatically. The body always knows. The body is the guardian of truth. When you betray yourself, the body tightens, constricts, grows heavy. When you honor yourself, even if it is difficult, the body often feels strangely clear. This somatic truth is a form of mysticism. It is the self speaking through flesh. I want you to imagine again the lamp bearer in the temple. In the first phase, she lights the halls for others and ignores her own inner chambers. In the second phase, she finally turns the lamp inward, and what she sees is not only pain, but beauty. She sees the child who has been alone. She sees the anger that has been imprisoned. She sees the desire that has been starved. She sees the part of her that longs to rest, to play, to be held, to be cared for. And as she turns compassion inward, she begins to heal the original wound, the belief that she exists for others. This is why I say the empath's compassion can become a hidden self-betrayal, because the deepest compassion you owe is to the self. When you continually pour compassion outward while leaving the self abandoned, you are repeating the earliest trauma. You are treating yourself as you were treated, as secondary, as a tool, as an emotional resource, and the psyche eventually revolts. It demands equality. It demands that you treat your own soul with the same tenderness you offer strangers. And when you do, something miraculous occurs. Your compassion becomes clearer. It becomes more discerning. You begin to see who is truly receptive and who is merely hungry. You begin to recognize when your help is welcomed and when it is demanded. You begin to sense when your presence nourishes and when it enables. You begin to understand that compassion without discernment is not spiritual, it is unconscious. Discernment is the missing masculine principle in many empathic personalities. The empath often lives in the feminine principle, feeling, merging, nurturing, flowing, but individuation demands the integration of the masculine principle, differentiation, boundary, discernment, decision. Without this masculine inner force, the empath becomes flooded. She becomes consumed by the collective. She becomes prey to those who manipulate emotion. But when discernment awakens, compassion becomes powerful. It is no longer naive. It is no longer available to be stolen. I will say something that may shock you, yet it is profoundly true. Some people do not want your compassion. They want your energy. They want your attention. They want your emotional labor. They want your light as a resource. And they will call it love. They will call it need. They will call it trauma. They will call it destiny. But it is consumption. And the empath until she awakens, will mistake consumption for intimacy. In the underworld myths, there is always a figure who feeds on life: vampires, devourers, spirits who drain. These are not merely stories. They are psychological symbols of relationships that consume vitality. The empath must learn to see such relationships without romanticizing them. She must stop imagining she can heal the devourer through endless giving. In myth, the devourer is not healed by feeding it. It is healed by confronting it with truth, with boundary, with consequence, and often it is not healed at all. The empath must accept that some souls will not change because you love them. They change only when they face their own emptiness. This acceptance is grief. The empath must grieve the fantasy that love can save everyone. She must grieve the childhood hope that if she is good enough, she will be safe. She must grieve the dream of being chosen, being valued, being finally seen by the one who has been blind. And grief is the doorway to freedom. It is painful, but it is honest. It is the soul releasing illusions. When grief arrives, the empath may feel as though she is losing her heart, but she is not losing it. She is reclaiming it. She is removing it from places where it has been used as currency. She is bringing it back to the self. And from this reclaimed heart, a new form of love will grow, one that does not betray her. This is the beginning of real compassion. Compassion that includes you. And now you begin to see why this warning is not merely psychological, but initiatory. The empath stands at a gate that does not belong to ordinary life. It belongs to transformation. For when compassion has been used as a bridge into self-betrayal, the psyche eventually demands a different kind of sacrifice, the sacrifice of the old identity. Not the sacrifice of your soul, but the sacrifice of the persona you have worn to survive. It is one of the great ironies of inner life that people will sacrifice their true being for years without hesitation, yet recoil in terror when asked to sacrifice a false image. And for the empath, the false image is often the saintly one, the endlessly patient one, the one who understands everyone, the one who never needs, the one who always forgives. You must grasp the enormity of this. The empath's goodness can become a prison when it is not chosen consciously. It becomes a ritual of self-negation. The psyche then splits. On the surface, a luminous, compassionate figure. Below, a starving shadow. And the starving shadow does not remain quiet forever. It begins to leak into life in strange forms. It may leak as irritability with small things, a sudden intolerance, a sharpness that surprises even the empath herself. It may leak as depression, as though the soul has left the body. It may leak as fantasies of running away, disappearing, starting over. It may leak as numbness in intimacy, because the heart has grown tired of being used. And most dangerously, it may leak as self-disgust, because the empath can feel she is betraying her own ideals while also being unable to stop. The psyche then becomes a battlefield, and the empath suffers not only from the external world, but from internal civil war. This is why purification of compassion is essential. You cannot simply decide to give less like a diet. The empath's pattern is not a habit, it is an archetypal possession. And archetypes do not dissolve through willpower alone. They must be met, understood, and integrated. The first step is the one that feels almost blasphemous. You must stop believing that your compassion is always virtuous. You must allow the idea that your compassion can be a weapon turned inward. The psyche needs this honesty. Without it, you will remain innocent. And innocence is not the same as purity. Innocence is often unconsciousness. When I say innocence, I mean this. The empath may unconsciously use compassion to avoid her own aggression. She may fear aggression because she associates it with cruelty. Yet aggression in its original meaning is simply the drive to move toward life, to assert, to take space, to protect. The empath who has forbidden aggression becomes passive. She becomes invaded. She becomes resentful. She becomes secretly angry at those who take. Yet she cannot say no. She is caught in a tragic loop. She gives, then feels used. She feels used, then hates herself for feeling it. She hates herself, then gives more to prove she is good. This loop is self-betrayal sanctified. The psyche demands that she reclaim aggression as sacred force. In dreams, this often appears as a sword, a shield, a spear, a fierce animal, an act of fighting back. The empath wakes startled, thinking she is becoming violent, but the dream is not making her violent, it is giving her a missing tool. The psyche is gifting her with the capacity to defend the self. Without defense, compassion is exposed. It becomes an open wound rather than a gift. This is why so many empaths feel exhausted. They are living without psychic skin. They are like a city without walls. Everything enters. Everyone enters. Every mood, every need, every demand. And because they confuse walls with cruelty, they remain open until the very openness becomes their sickness. But the solution is not to become cold. The solution is to build conscious boundaries. A wall is not hatred. A wall is the recognition that life needs form. Without form, there is chaos. Without boundary, there is invasion. Now, there is another shadow that must be named. The empath's compassion can become a subtle form of superiority. This is difficult to hear because the empath sees herself as humble, yet unconsciously she may believe she is more evolved because she feels more. She may look at others and think, they are asleep. I understand. I am deeper. She may even attract narcissistic figures because she unconsciously needs someone to confirm her moral position as the good one. The narcissist becomes the bad one, and through this contrast, she can avoid looking at her own shadow. She can remain the victim saint. This is not conscious manipulation. It is archetypal polarization, but it prevents wholeness. The narcissist and the empath can become two halves of a distorted whole. One embodies selfishness without conscience. The other embodies conscience without selfhood. One takes, one gives, one inflates, one deflates, but both are trapped in extremes. The true individuation demands that the empath integrate a healthy selfishness, and that the narcissistic type integrate humility. And often, in life, the narcissistic type does not integrate. The empath must integrate anyway. She must stop waiting for the other's transformation as permission for her own. This is where the mysticism becomes fierce, for individuation is not polite. It tears you away from the collective dream. It demands that you become what you are, not what you are praised for. and the empath is often praised for her giving. So she has built her identity on being needed. To stop being needed feels like death. In the unconscious, it is death. It is the death of the old persona, and the psyche experiences symbolic death as a real death. So the empath may go through panic, grief, emptiness, confusion. She may say, "I don't recognize myself." She may say, "I've lost my softness." She may say, "I feel selfish, cold, numb." But what is happening is not a loss of softness. It is the withdrawal of a compulsive performance. The real softness, the authentic tenderness, must be reborn later in a new form. In alchemy, this is the stage where the substance is heated until old impurities burn away. The empath's nervous system is heated by conflict, by the pressure of boundaries, by the collapse of old roles she thinks she is breaking. In truth, she is being refined, but refinement is painful because it demands that you face the underworld of your own motivations. Let us look at motivations without moral judgment. The empath often gives for many reasons. Love, yes. Empathy, yes. But also fear, fear of being disliked, fear of being abandoned, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of being alone with herself, fear of the emptiness that appears when she stops caretaking. Many empaths are terrified of stillness, not because they hate peace, but because stillness allows the abandoned self to speak, and that voice is full of grief. This grief is the treasure, it is the gold hidden in the dark, because beneath the empath's overgiving is often a deep wound of not receiving. She has not been held, not truly. She has not been cared for without earning it. She has not been loved in a way that did not demand performance, and so she gives what she longs to receive, hoping unconsciously that someone will finally mirror it back. This is why she may be drawn to emotionally unavailable people. She is reenacting the original wound, trying to finally win love from a cold source. But cold sources do not become warm because you freeze for them. They remain cold. And the empath's compassion becomes the slow sacrifice of her own warmth. So the purification of compassion requires a radical reversal. You must become the one who receives. You must allow yourself to be cared for. You must allow yourself to be imperfect. You must allow yourself to disappoint. You must allow yourself to be misunderstood. These are initiations. These are not ordinary psychological steps. They are spiritual thresholds. And now we must speak of the archetype that often drives empathic self-betrayal, the good daughter. This archetype is not only for women, but it is particularly strong in women because societies have trained women for centuries to survive through pleasing. The good daughter is the one who carries the family's emotional burden. She senses what must be done. She does it without being asked. She sacrifices her own desire to maintain harmony. She becomes the emotional spine of the household. And if she stops, the household collapses, or so she believes. This belief is often true in dysfunctional systems, but the cost is enormous. Her own life becomes postponed forever. Many empaths live as though their real life will begin later, after everyone else is okay. This is the ultimate self-betrayal, to treat your own destiny as secondary. The self does not accept this postponement. The self will eventually create a crisis that forces you to choose. Sometimes this crisis comes as illness, sometimes as burnout, sometimes as a relationship collapse, sometimes as a sudden awakening that makes the old life unbearable. The empath feels punished, but she is being rescued from herself. In dreams, the good daughter often appears as a girl cleaning a house endlessly, while others sit and eat, or a girl carrying heavy bags, while others walk freely, or a girl trapped in a small room, hearing music outside. These dreams are the psyche's revolt. They say, you are carrying what is not yours. You are imprisoned by loyalty. You are working for love that should be free. Now, to break this pattern, the empath must commit a sacrilege against the old family religion. She must choose herself, and this choice triggers guilt. The psyche then must learn a new truth. Guilt is not always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is a sign of growth. Sometimes guilt is the pain of leaving the old role. It is the pain of becoming separate. And separation is necessary for individuation. The empath must learn to tolerate the guilt without obeying it. She must learn to say, I feel guilty, and I will still say no. I feel guilty, and I will still rest. I feel guilty, and I will still leave. I feel guilty, and I will still protect myself. This is a new spiritual discipline, far more difficult than compassion, as sacrifice. For sacrifice is praised, self-protection is often condemned. Yet, as she practices this, something begins to change in her inner world. She notices that her nervous system becomes calmer, her sleep improves, her body becomes less tense. She begins to feel a strange spaciousness, as though a room has been cleared. At first, this spaciousness feels empty, even frightening, because she has lived her entire life in emotional crowds, other people's needs, other people's moods. The emptiness feels like abandonment. But if she stays, she discovers it is not abandonment, it is freedom. Freedom is quiet at first. It is not dramatic, it is simply the absence of pressure, the absence of constant responsibility for others, and in this quiet, the self begins to emerge. The empath begins to feel her own desire again, not the desire to heal others, but the desire to live. She begins to remember what she likes, what she wants, what she refuses. This remembering is sacred. It is a return of soul. Now the empath must also face a deep fear. What if my compassion was my only value? What if I am nothing without being helpful? This fear reveals the wound of conditional worth, and here the empath must undergo another initiation, to accept that she is valuable without being useful. This is the most radical truth for those who have lived as caretakers. They believe they must earn existence. But existence is not earned, existence is given. You are not here because you perform compassion. You are here because you are a soul. When this truth enters, compassion becomes something else entirely. It becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. It becomes a gift rather than a payment. It becomes discernment. The empath can now offer compassion without losing herself, because she no longer uses compassion to secure safety. She no longer uses compassion as a substitute for self-worth. And now we can speak of a mystical paradox. Compassion that does not betray the self is actually more powerful. It has gravity. It has authority. It is not pleading. It is not apologetic. It is not desperate. It does not have the energetic signature of hunger. It has the signature of fullness. And people feel this. Those who are genuine will feel safe with it. Those who are exploitative will feel threatened by it. For exploiters depend on your guilt. They depend on your endless patience. They depend on your fear of being bad. When you become compassionate and sovereign, they cannot manipulate you. They may say you have changed. They may accuse you, but their accusations are often confessions. They are confessing that they benefited from your self-betrayal. Here, the empath must become courageous. She must accept that not everyone will approve of her wholeness. In fact, wholeness often provokes, because wholeness reveals the fragmentation of others. When you become whole, you become a mirror, and many cannot tolerate the mirror. The empath may then face loneliness, not because she is wrong, but because she has outgrown certain bonds. This loneliness is the desert of individuation. In the desert, you are stripped of external validation. You cannot rely on being needed to feel worthy. You cannot rely on rescuing to feel connected. You must learn to connect from authenticity. This is a profound spiritual training. In the desert, dreams become especially vivid. The psyche compensates for external loss by offering inner guidance. The empath may dream of ancient temples, forests, rivers, mountains, wise figures, animals that guide. She may dream of crossing bridges, climbing stairs, opening locked doors. These are images of inner initiation. The unconscious is saying, your life is not collapsing, it is opening. Your old identity is dying, but your self is being born. And in this stage, compassion must be turned inward in a new way, not as self-pity, but as self-parenting. The empath must become the adult who finally protects the inner child. She must say, I will not sacrifice you anymore. I will not offer you to those who cannot value you. I will not silence you. I will not abandon you for belonging. This vow is the true healing. It breaks the ancient contract. When this vow is made, the empath begins to change her relationships at the root. She no longer attracts the same devourers, because her energy signature changes. Devourers sense boundaries like predators sense fences. They may test, but they cannot enter. And the empath no longer confuses testing with love. She recognizes it as hunger. She stops feeding it. This is liberation. And now, finally, compassion can become what it was always meant to be, a sacred flow through a sovereign soul, not a bleeding wound offered to the world. And now we stand before the final inner gate, where the empath must confront the most subtle illusion of all, the belief that compassion is the highest good even when it violates truth. This illusion is seductive because it wears the face of spiritual virtue. It whispers that love means tolerating everything, that kindness means never confronting, that empathy means endless understanding, that awakening means remaining soft no matter what is done to you. But the psyche, when it moves toward wholeness, rejects such sentimental spirituality. It demands a higher integrity, a love rooted in reality rather than fantasy. For compassion that betrays the self is not compassion, it is a dissociation from reality. It is a refusal to see the truth of what is happening. It is the attempt to keep the world harmless by shrinking oneself, and that shrinking is always paid for. The cost is not visible at first, because the empath is trained to ignore cost. She is trained to ignore exhaustion, to ignore resentment, to ignore the body's warnings, to ignore the quiet terror in the stomach that says something is wrong. She calls it sensitivity, she calls it intuition, she calls it spiritual warfare. Yet, in the deepest sense, it is often the self saying, your life is not aligned with your truth. Alignment is an unpopular word because it forces responsibility. If your life is not aligned, it means you must change something. And change is precisely what the empath fears because change threatens connection. So she clings to compassion as an excuse to remain in the old pattern. She will say, I stay because I love, but beneath this often is, I stay because I fear the emptiness of leaving. The empath must finally ask herself with ruthless tenderness, if I removed my fear, would I still call this love? This question is not intellectual, it belongs to the soul, and when it is asked honestly, a strange quiet begins, because in that moment the psyche senses something new. The empath is no longer hypnotized. She is waking up from the trance of virtue. She is beginning to see the mechanics behind her compassion. And when you see the mechanics, you can no longer pretend it is destiny. It becomes a choice. Here we enter the deepest psychology of self-betrayal. The empath often confuses pain with meaning. She believes that if she suffers, it must be purposeful. She believes that her compassion is a spiritual assignment. She believes she is chosen to bear what others cannot. And perhaps, in a symbolic sense, she is. Yet this chosenness becomes toxic when it is used to justify staying in what destroys her. For there is no spiritual assignment that requires the abandonment of the self. The self is the very ground of spiritual life. To abandon it is to abandon the divine within. In ancient mystical traditions, the soul must indeed pass through sacrifice. But the sacrifice is never the sacrifice of truth. It is the sacrifice of illusion. It is the sacrifice of the false self. It is the sacrifice of attachments that keep you small. And for the empath, the primary attachment is to her role as the redeemer. She must let this go. She must allow others to carry their own fate. She must accept that not every wound is hers to heal, and that sometimes the most compassionate act is to stop interfering with another's evolution. This is a terrifying thought to the empath because she has been trained to believe that if she does not help, she is guilty. But there is a form of help that is actually violence, helping someone avoid responsibility, helping someone avoid consequences, helping someone avoid self-reflection, helping someone avoid the collapse that would force them to change. The empath believes she is preventing suffering, but she may be preventing transformation, and thus her compassion becomes a chain around the other person's soul as well as her own. You see, love that is unconscious is often possessive, even when it looks gentle. The empath may not possess through domination like the narcissistic type. She may possess through caretaking. She becomes indispensable. She becomes the emotional oxygen. And this creates dependency. Dependency feels like love to wounded people. But it is not love. It is mutual bondage. The narcissistic type may bind through fear. The empath may bind through compassion. Both are forms of captivity. Therefore, the purification of compassion demands this. You must become dispensable. You must become unnecessary. You must be able to love without being needed. This is profound because it strikes at the root of the empath's survival adaptation. To be unnecessary feels like death to her nervous system, but to the self, it is liberation, because only when you no longer need to be needed can you truly love freely. Otherwise, love is always mixed with the hunger for relevance. There is a dream that appears frequently in those who are breaking this pattern. The dreamer is in a crowded room, and everyone is speaking at once, demanding attention. She tries to help, but her voice is lost. Then she suddenly turns and sees a door that she never noticed. She walks through it into silence, into a garden, into a forest, into open air. As she walks away, she expects panic, guilt, punishment, but instead she feels lightness. This dream is a message from the psyche. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to be silent. You are allowed to choose peace. Peace, for the empath, is an unfamiliar territory. Many have never lived in peace. They have lived in anticipation. They have lived in emotional labor. They have lived in constant attunement. So when peace comes, it feels strange, even empty. The empath may become restless in peace. She may search for drama unconsciously. She may feel she is doing something wrong. But this is only the nervous system detoxifying from chaos. It is withdrawal. The empath has been addicted to intensity because intensity was the language of love in her early world. When she begins to live in peace, she must learn a new language. At first it feels foreign, but slowly it becomes home. And this is the true mystical reversal. The empath must come home to herself. To come home is not to isolate. It is not to become cold. It is not to stop feeling. It is to become centered. It is to let the self become the axis rather than other people's needs. When the self becomes the axis, compassion becomes an orbit rather than an eclipse. You can move toward others without losing yourself. You can care without drowning. You can love without vanishing. The empath must now integrate her shadow fully. This includes her anger, her selfishness, her desire to be left alone, her refusal, her power, her capacity to disappoint. These are not flaws. They are parts of wholeness. And wholeness is the only true protection against exploitation. Exploiters do not fear your compassion. They feed on it. They fear your wholeness because wholeness cannot be manipulated by guilt. When the empath integrates these qualities, she becomes paradoxically more compassionate because her compassion is no longer compelled. It is no longer desperate. It is no longer bargaining. It is no longer trying to earn safety. It becomes clean. It becomes like sunlight that does not apologize for shining. Sunlight does not chase those who prefer darkness. It simply shines. Those who wish to warm themselves come. Those who do not, leave. This is mature compassion. It offers without clinging. Now we must speak of a crucial sign of purified compassion, the ability to withdraw without hatred. Many empaths, when they finally set boundaries, swing to the opposite extreme. They become harsh, bitter, contemptuous. This is understandable because the shadow rushes in like a flood when the dam breaks. But the task of individuation is not to swing from one extreme to another. It is to find the middle path, the axis. The empath must learn to say no without vengeance, to leave without cruelty, to detach without contempt. This is difficult because the nervous system has been trained to equate separation with war. But separation can be peaceful, separation can be holy. This is where the spiritual dimension deepens. Many empaths are deeply attuned to suffering. They can feel it as if it were their own, and because of this, they fear that boundaries will make them heartless. But boundaries do not stop empathy. They stop fusion. Fusion is not empathy. Fusion is collapse of differentiation. Fusion is when your nervous system becomes the battlefield of someone else's wounds. Empathy is understanding while remaining oneself. This is the mature form, and it requires a strong ego aligned with the self. So the empath must strengthen ego, not in arrogance, but in structure. She must develop what I might call inner masculine spine, the capacity to decide, to hold, to endure guilt, to tolerate someone's disappointment, to maintain her truth even when others protest. This is the true strength, far deeper than endurance of abuse. Most empaths have endured pain, few have endured the discomfort of saying no. Yet the latter is a great initiation. There is a symbol that often appears at this stage, the crown. The empath may dream of wearing a crown, or finding one, or being given one by an old wise figure. This is not about superiority, it is about sovereignty. It is the psyche declaring, you are no longer a servant to the collective. You belong to yourself. Your life is yours. Your energy is yours. Your compassion is yours to give, not yours to be taken. When sovereignty rises, the empath becomes dangerous in the sacred sense, not dangerous as a predator, but dangerous to illusions, dangerous to manipulation, dangerous to emotional blackmail. She no longer rushes to fix. She no longer rushes to explain. She no longer rushes to prove. She can sit in silence and let another person show their true nature. She becomes a mirror rather than a sponge, and this is why those who rely on control will panic. They will attempt to provoke her, guilt her, shame her, charm her, threaten her, but she remains still. She has learned the secret. Her compassion must include herself, or it is not compassion at all. This stillness is not numbness, it is mastery. It is the calm of someone who has reclaimed her inner center, and from this center, she can love more profoundly than before because she is no longer giving to avoid her own pain. She is giving because she is whole enough to give. At this stage, the empath may look back on her past and feel grief. She may see how many years she abandoned herself. She may feel sorrow for the opportunities lost, for the energy wasted, for the love given to those who could not receive it. This grief is natural. It is part of integration, but she must not become trapped in regret. Regret is another form of self-punishment. The empath has punished herself enough. The task now is forgiveness, but not the old forgiveness that ignores truth. The new forgiveness is forgiveness of the self for having survived as she could. It is the compassionate acknowledgement, I did what I needed to do to belong. Now I choose differently. This is the true mystical transformation. Compassion returning to its rightful place, not as a chain, but as a river. And now I offer you the final warning in its clearest form. Beware of compassion that makes you smaller. Beware of compassion that demands your silence. Beware of compassion that leaves you drained, anxious, guilty, and unseen. Beware of compassion that excuses repeated harm. Beware of compassion that requires you to betray your instincts. For this is not love. It is an old survival pattern dressed in sacred clothing. The self does not ask for your self-erasure. The self asks for your wholeness. Your compassion is meant to be an expression of your wholeness, not a substitute for it. Your compassion is meant to flow from a place of inner authority, not from fear. Your compassion is meant to illuminate truth, not to hide it. And when your compassion is purified, you will no longer be drawn into the old contracts. You will no longer be seduced by those who feed on your light. You will no longer fear your boundaries. You will no longer confuse guilt with morality. You will no longer equate suffering with love. Instead, you will become something rarer and more sacred than the empath who endlessly gives. You will become the individuated soul who loves without abandoning herself. You will become a presence that heals not by rescuing, but by embodying wholeness. You will become a living symbol of the truth that compassion, when joined with sovereignty, is no longer self-betrayal, it is awakening. And when you awaken in this way, you will discover something that changes everything. You were never meant to be consumed. You were meant to become